Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, January 31st, 2022, and as of last night, the Democratic Party officially released their brand new congressional maps for the state of New York. This is one of the last states that we have been waiting on, with a very large population and a total number of 26 congressional districts that need to be decided in time for the 2022 midterm elections. Taking a look at our national overview, the state of New York is not filled in because they have not confirmed this map, but it seems to be all but ensured. The Democrats at this point in time have a supermajority in the state Senate and the state Assembly that were recently elected back in 2020. Republicans actually held control of the state Senate in the state of New York until 2019. So with their newfound Senate majority, the Democratic Party has decided to go for the gusto and propose and potentially pass a brand new gerrymandered map that serves as one of the biggest advancements for the Democratic Party across the nation. Taking a look at this new map, as I showed you in the very beginning, the Washington Post can detail this out by Trump district. I don't think that the map that we have seen on FiveThirtyEight really does it justice, so you can actually see the full impact of these gerrymandered districts. What you find here is that there are more competitive districts and less Democratic advancement districts than you might expect, but that simply isn't the case. Taking a look at the Trump-Biden breakdown, you can begin to see how the Democratic Party carefully curated this map to ensure a majority in the state delegation for the next 10 years, regardless of what type the national environment might end up being. On the left, you have the current map where the Democrats and the Republicans are not necessarily at fair representation, but Republicans currently hold 9 seats, with the GOP being, of course, there, and the Democrats at 18. And what that majority has done, and we can actually see this more recently, I flipped the last two numbers. You have 19 and 8. 19 with the Democrats being in the advancement. What you will find is that 19 isn't, of course, the worst thing. 19, the Democratic Party is 19 out of 27, which gets to around 70% in terms of representation. Looking at the 2020 House vote, the Democrats won 62% of the vote. So while it is an over, representation of the Democratic Party's vote share, and Republicans actually gained 5% in terms of their last showing in the state of New York, the result is roughly about where it should be compared to a bunch of other states in terms of fairness and equal representation. But this brand new map gets a lot worse for the Republican Party. It puts them in a position where in a normal type of year, they are winning simply just 4 districts. And right now, they currently hold 8. Think about that for a moment. Half of your entire Republican delegation will be forced to leave the United States House of Representatives simply because the Democratic Party wants to be, in a sense, yes, hypocritical, and also advance their own political gains. The state of New York, I think, really is putting forward this to combat what they expected to be Republican gerrymanders across the nation. But as we now know, the number of changes from the old maps versus the new maps is that Democrats have actually gained 7 Democratic-leaning seats, and Republicans have only gained 1. The only real losers in this situation, not necessarily the GOP, because many of these gained Democratic-leaning seats were already won by Democrats, but those who wanted competitive districts. We've already seen 6 detract from the total, which means we can expect to maybe see at most 20 to 30 competitive districts in 2022 compared to 10 years ago where we had about 50 to 60. And looking at our new congressional maps here, I will not ignore the fact that the GOP has gerrymandered. I have made a very important note to point out both sides of the extremes when it comes down to these maps. I've covered Illinois, I've covered Ohio, I've covered North Carolina, I've covered Georgia, I've covered a bunch of states where the GOP and the Democratic Party have intentionally underrepresented the opposition party in an effort to expand their own national advantage or potential national advantage. Both parties do it. It's never right, and the Democrats do look very hypocritical for this, but I see them doing this, number one, as a revenge ploy for Governor Kathy Hochul, and number two, the fact that they are trying to counteract what they saw in Texas, what they saw in Ohio, what they saw in North Carolina, by drawing out these Republicans in the state of New York. Now, if you don't know why I mentioned the governor of the state of New York, I think you'll fairly understand the second point about trying to advance themselves on the national level and combat any potential losses out of gerrymandering in GOP states. But Governor Kathy Hochul actually was a representative in the state of New York. And the map that was passed when she was in the House was a map that the Republican Party, with partial support from Democrats, gerrymandered her district to make it very much more Republican. I mean, the district went from being a swing district to a pretty heavily Republican-leaning district. And while she only ended up losing by about 2 points in her election afterwards, it was the fact that she was cut out of a competitive district and cut out of the House of Representatives simply because of gerrymandering, because that district was made to be more Republican. So she came in with a vendetta and she rose to the office of governorship, and now she is going to more than likely sign off on this brand new map. Now, enough about, discussing the politics behind it all, beyond, what we now actually see in this map. We can take a look at what the Democrats have actually done in a very, very good way, simply because the Washington Post has provided us with such an informational map. Again, on the left is the current map where Republicans currently hold a total number of 8 seats in the state of New York. On the right is the new map that has been proposed by the New York Democrats that gives the GOP simply just 4 seats in terms of representation, which is honestly a little bit more than they expected. The Democratic Party on the national level proposed a map, the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which asked the state of New York to pass a 23-3 map, meaning the GOP would get simply 3 elections, 3 congressional districts that they would be able to win in. Of course, that was very extreme, and it would actually threaten the Democratic Party by, drawing them out too thin, making it so in a wave year that the Republicans could actually end up winning more than just 3 seats. But what this 22-4 map does is ensures that simply doesn't happen. On this map right here, you will find that they have shored up the Republican districts. Instead of spreading the Trump vote out in a Trump plus 12 district, Trump plus 10, Trump plus 12, barely a Democratic district, Biden plus 1.5. What it has done is move it over to making them all safe red districts and coalescing the Democratic vote and consolidating it into different congressional districts to make them more Democratic leaning. For instance, right around this region, you have the 19th district, which used to be Biden plus 1.5. Well, that new district is now Biden plus 10. They have taken all of the districts that were competitive, Biden plus 9 in John Katko's district, and made it so now, and that is the 24th district. Let's see if we, maybe they've just renamed the district, but what you will find is that there's enough space for the Democrats to run up there, and enough so that they are in a position where they're up, Biden plus 18.2, Biden plus 22, Biden plus 25, Biden plus 25. These are things that are done intentionally to give the Democratic Party that advantage in these new congressional districts. And what you will also find is that in New York City specifically, you are taking a look at a bunch of new districts that have been taken inner parts of the city, the Democratic vote share, and turned all of these districts into, get this, every single one of them being now Biden plus 10 districts or more. I think the narrowest Biden district is that one that I just showed you, the Biden plus 8.3 district right around here. But looking at the parts across, the area of New York City and then going into different regions on the outskirts, you will find that the Democratic Party simply does not have a bad pathway to victory here. In fact, they oust a Republican here, they oust a Republican here, and they leave just a singular district, which Trump won by 14.3. So instead of keeping the competitive districts, instead of keeping the competitive parts of the state, the New York Democratic Party really put forth this effort to completely remove the GOP's chances at victory in many of these congressional districts. This is one of the most aggressive gerrymanders that the Democratic Party has put forth, and it is very unfortunate to see, considering that that party has been very big on trying to oppose gerrymandering. But then again, they always raise the point. They proposed a bill in the United States Senate that would ban gerrymandering across the nation, yet it did not pass, but only one party vehemently opposed it. Now, 538 did this analytical article today where they talked about this heavily biased map towards the Democrats, and they're right about that. And they asked the question, will this pass? And in a sense, there is that argument, if this is put forth by a fair court, and if there is something written into the New York Constitution that outlines the map itself should not be favored, or any map should not be favored heavily in favor of a specific party by intention, which it is outlined in the state of New York. But the problem here for Republicans is that the New York congressional district map would have to go up to the state Supreme Court. Every single one of the justices on the state Supreme Court has been appointed by a Democrat. Every single one, which means with all of them being up there, there is practically no way that they would look at this and say, we are going to shoot this down so the GOP can gain seats. It is possible that there is some type of last-minute surprise victory like we saw in Alabama for the Democrats with a 3-appointed Republican court in that position where they actually voted 3-0 to get rid of the Alabama congressional map and give it back and potentially add an additional Democratic seat. There is always that chance. But knowing that the Democrats have put forth such an egregious gerrymander, I think they are fairly confident in what the actual outcome will be. I think that they are, pretty secure about what they see, considering that they know that the governor will sign off on this. They now have a state legislative advantage when it comes down to the supermajority. Republicans have 43 seats in the state assembly. Democrats have 105. And looking at the state senate here, let's see if we can find the elections here. Let's see if we can find the state senate for some of these more important elections. Let's see, New York state elections, not necessarily that one. Maybe the state elected office, the state legislature. Let's go ahead and take a look here. New York State Senate. And what you will find is that currently the Democrats hold 43 seats. 42 are needed for a supermajority to 20 with the GOP there. And, Republicans used to have the majority because of independent Democrats who caucused with the GOP, but that is no longer there. 6 out of the 8 of them were primaried back when their majority actually mattered. And, taking a look at this new map, it is entirely possible that the Democratic Party passes this map with a 2/3 vote, which is exactly what they would need to do in order to pass this new map into total representation. And what this actually acknowledges is that there's a possibility that it fails in the state legislature. There's a possibility that it fails in front of the courts, but neither of which seem to be probable. The Democrats put forth this map because they know it could pass, and they know it will hold up in court, even if it isn't necessarily abiding by the New York Constitution, simply because they have packed the court with every single person that is favorable towards them, all of them being Democrats. Now, if we want to actually visualize the lack of representation the GOP now has in the state of New York, you have to look back at the 2020 election. You have to look back at how red parts of the state looked. You had the 22nd district going red, you had the 21st district going red, the 24th, the 23rd, the 27th. What you had was a bunch of upstate Republicans winning there. And you had 3 Republicans in New York's 1st, New York's 2nd, and New York's 11th district, all within a similar region in the southern part of the state. And yet they are now being coalesced and condensed down into a singular congressional district, allowing a Republican to just be there compared to previously 3. So looking at this, what you found is that in that old map, Republicans were getting roughly 30% in terms of representation, which wasn't the worst for the GOP. But now, remember 30% being your number, the Republican Party can win 4 out of 26 districts. Let's take a look at what that means. 4 out of 26 is, get this, 15% in terms of total representation. In a state where the Republican Party routinely gets about a third or more of the vote, more recently won 36% of the vote across the state, they are getting 15% in terms of representation. Let that sink in for a moment. While some Democrats might be happy with that and saying, this is exactly what the Republican Party gets. They have gerrymandered many of our maps, so we are going to give it back to them. Republicans are looking at this and saying, you are going very extreme. We see Illinois, we see New York, and our gerrymanders are getting shot down in Ohio, Alabama, North Carolina. Florida doesn't seem like it's going to be as aggressive as it might be, and Democrats are going to use this as a means of advancement. And it absolutely is true. I think that, both sides are not necessarily right about this. I think that it is very clear that the GOP is being underrepresented and that the GOP is, not being fairly depicted in Congress by the New York delegation after this map is passed. But what it does tell is that the Democratic Party is not willing to have, just stand on the sidelines and allow them to be orchestratedly taken down by the GOP in many of these states. I mean, had New York not gerrymandered this map, Ohio and North Carolina would still be there. No matter what happened to the state of New York, all of those maps that have already been gerrymandered weren't in response to New York, but rather were ahead of it, which means that New York potentially could have been a response to it. And I don't think that this is all of a sudden, some state legislatures are going to look at New York and say, we are all of a sudden going to gerrymander our state. Gerrymandering is something that is carefully thought out for. Gerrymandering is something that takes months, possibly years to perfect, and you need to know your electorate pretty well. This isn't something that you can just randomly decide based off of how another state is going to go. Retaliation is rarely a form of, a mission of the redistricting process, simply because maps get confirmed at different times, and sometimes your deadlines are half a year before in other states. And, seeing the maps across the nation, I don't think that either party really is to blame for starting gerrymandering in 2022, or really the process altogether. It has been around since the 1700s, so it's not something that new, but it is something that we have started to see more recently, at least on the GOP side, simply because they have more representation. And they also have more control over the process itself. But it seems as if, despite all of that, I remember talking to you guys 6 months ago explaining how the GOP has the upper hand in the process itself. If this map is to pass, the 538 average in terms of changing seats here will shift dramatically. What you will find is that if this map passes again, like I said, you will find the Democratic Party gaining 10 seats when it comes down to the new map. 10 seats overall. as an advancement if this map passes and the Republican Party actually ends up losing 3. I mean, that's the interesting part about this. What you find is that Democrats are going to prop themselves up significantly, and the GOP is going to be pushed down, despite them having, again, control of over 100 more districts in this nation than the Democratic Party does. But it simply doesn't matter. Looking at the map, the Democrats have under 100 districts to control in terms of redrawing and redistricting. The Republicans have over 210. 210 versus under 100. And yet somehow, the Democratic Party gets the upper hand. This happens because maps like New York pass. This happens because Republicans don't go as aggressive in states such as Texas, or as in states such as Florida, where they might have all the means to do so, but are deciding not to. It's very similar, but flipped parties, to what the Democrats did in 2010. When Democrats did have control of some states, they didn't exactly go as intentionally gerrymandering as you might expect. The GOP did, however, and the Democrats are now in this position where even in the states where they don't have a lot of control, Republicans are actually letting up on them, and they are allowing new maps to pass that aren't super unfavorable towards the Democratic Party. And also, courts are ruling in favor of Democrats a lot more than they did in the past 10 years. So I think this is a really perfect combination for the Democratic Party in order for them to keep where they are right now in the House of Representatives. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's, right to keep only 15% representation in a state that routinely gives the GOP 30 to 40% of the vote, but that's just how politics is. Democrats could make the same argument in North Carolina or Ohio, and they do, and that's why you see the court cases. So the New York map, I definitely think, is going to go into litigation. I think if this map does pass, which it more than likely will, we are going to see the courts end up making a ruling in the state of New York. But one thing that I do think that you should take away from this is that it probably will not end up being stricken down. The Democratic Party has that majority in the Supreme Court ideologically and party affiliation wise. Taking a look at the elections and who controls the state legislature, the state assembly, state senate together, the Democratic Party does. They have a Democratic governor. I mean, what you have is a vengeful Democratic governor, you have a vengeful state legislature, and you have all Democratic appointed Supreme Court justices in the state of New York. I don't see a way that this map fails, but there's always that possibility because we saw it happen in Alabama despite nobody expecting that to happen. American politics can really change overnight. But if this map does pass again, remind yourself that the GOP will see some significant pushbacks nationwide. They are going to see themselves lose net 2 seats in terms of the process itself, while Democrats gain 10. And it's an entire real possibility that because of gerrymandering, Democrats could end up losing control of the House of Representatives, but very narrowly. We could see a map potentially like this one from 2020, just with Republicans being at 222 and Democrats being at 213. And that will be on the backs of these gerrymandered states on both sides, arguably on both sides. But it will be on the fact that the Democratic Party is really consolidating and, winning many of these new districts in 2022 because they are taking states such as Illinois, New York, and cracking them, California, adding new Democratic districts, shoring up Democratic incumbents. And it's a strategy that, while definitely unfair and, hypocritical, to say the least, is a process that will work and will likely last them for the next 10 years as a point of interest and a big moment of victory for the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.